Hello everyone, welcome back to Music Appreciation. Today we are going to learn about our other two of the four basic instrument types. So yesterday we talked about strings and brass. Today we're going to talk about woodwind and percussion. And our essential question is the same as yesterday. What are the four basic instrument types and how do they produce sound? So review of yesterday, our four main instrument types are strings, brass, woodwind, and percussion. Our first type, woodwinds. So for a woodwind, sound is created by a wooden reed or reeds vibrating, which is amplified through the woodwind instrument. So what a reed is, it is a very thin and small piece of wood that is on the end of the instrument. So for example, this clarinet right here, you can see right here at the top, that's the reed. It's a very thin piece of wood, usually bamboo or something like that. But it is a very thin piece of wood that is attached to the end. And when the player blows into the end of the instrument, that reed vibrates. And that is what makes the vibration that makes the sound of the instrument. So that's where the reed is on a clarinet. This is a saxophone. You can kind of see it a little bit on the underside, but right there on the bottom of that mouthpiece, that's where the reed on a saxophone would be. And this up here is an oboe. It's also a woodwind. Up here you see the reed. This is actually what is known as a double reed. Instead of a single piece of wood like a clarinet, the oboe actually has two very small pieces of wood that come together at the end of the instrument so that when the player blows into the instrument, they vibrate against each other. So it's two pieces of wood, two reeds put together instead of just the one. So the example of a woodwind that I have for you today is my saxophone. So it is a woodwind instrument. So right here is, in my case, I have one made out of plastic, but normally they're made out of wood. But it's this little sliver of plastic here, that's the reed. So when I put the mouthpiece in my mouth and I blow into it, the reed vibrates, and that's how the sound comes out. Watch. So while I'm doing that, I'm blowing into the mouthpiece and that reed is vibrating. And then that vibration travels through the rest of the instrument and that's how you get the sound. How you change notes on a woodwind is, I'll stand up and show you. You actually press these buttons. The right hand also has some buttons as well. But you press these buttons and it makes these paddles cover up holes in the instrument. And that's what changes the sound. Watch. So that is how you play a woodwind. Here's an example of woodwinds playing. So here you see he's playing a saxophone. He has the reed is on the bottom of that mouthpiece, and while it's in his mouth, he blows into the instrument and it makes that reed vibrate. And then those vibrations go through the rest of the instrument, and that's how the saxophone plays. Then these here are just other examples of saxophones. They're a little bit different in size and shape, but these are all just different kinds of saxophone that he's playing here. Now, if you notice, this right here, I didn't talk about yet. And I'll show you why. Flutes are a weird woodwind, is what I have named them. Because a flute is considered a woodwind, but it's made of metal and it doesn't have a reed. The sound is actually made by blowing across the top of the hole in the flute. So you see right here, this is where the player would blow air across the top of the flute. And it's a lot like blowing across the top of a soda bottle. If you've ever gotten a soda bottle and like made a whistling noise by blowing across the top of it, that is exactly how a flute makes sound. and they are woodwinds, but they're made out of metal and don't have reeds. They're considered a woodwind because early versions of flutes and some cultural versions of flutes that we'll look at in the future were made out of wood. Now, modern versions are metal because a metal flute has a lot sharper of a sound. It changes the timbre a little bit and it makes it a lot easier to be heard. A wooden flute is usually a lot more mellow and a lot quieter, whereas a metal flute is more piercing and it's easier to hear. That's why modern flutes are made out of metal. However, they are considered a woodwind because flutes originally, when people first started making flutes, they were made out of wood. Here is an example of someone playing a flute. So this is actually a perfect angle to talk about this. You can see she's not blowing down into the flute. She's not blowing into the hole in the flute. She's actually blowing across the top of it. So right now she's actually blowing air directly into the camera, even though the flute is under her lips. So by blowing air over the top of it, that's how the flute gets its whistly sound. Our next category of instrument is percussion. Percussion instruments create sound by somehow striking the instrument in some way and getting a sound out of it. So examples could be drums, xylophone, gongs. That's what this is here. This is a xylophone right here. So each one of those little bars is made out of wood. And when someone hits it with a mallet, it makes a sound, making it a percussion instrument. This here is a gong. It's just a piece of metal. It's a disc of metal that when someone hits it with that mallet, it makes a crashing sound. So you get sound by hitting the instrument. So it's percussion. Same here with drums. You have to hit the drum to get sound out of it. So it's considered percussion. For percussion, the example that I have here at home is a drum. So it's a percussion instrument. So you hit it to get the sound out. You hit it and the sound comes out of it. Now, I don't have an example of a xylophone here with me, but if I did, I would just hit the keys on the xylophone and that's how the sound would come out of it. That's how any percussion instrument is played, is it is somehow hit or struck and that's where the sound comes from. Now, piano is also considered a percussion instrument, and this is a cartoon, but it actually perfectly shows what happens inside of a piano. So what's actually happening here is these are the strings in the piano here, and these are called hammers. Whenever Tom, playing the piano, whenever he presses down one of the keys on the piano, it makes one of those hammers hit a string. So every time it shows one of these little hammers moving and hitting a string, it's because he's hitting a key on the piano that corresponds to it. Okay, cartoon antics continue from here. But this is how the inside of a piano works, that all of these hammers correspond to a key being pressed. So for a piano, it's considered percussion because it is hitting the string. There are strings on the inside of it, yes, but you are hitting the string. So that falls under the definition of percussion. Because a percussion instrument, you have to hit the instrument in some way to get the sound out of it. Here's another example of percussion in action. So for all of these drums here, they all are hitting the drums to get the sound out of it. So these drums are percussion instruments. Now, percussion doesn't have to be relegated to the normal instruments that you see. Percussion instruments could be many different things. For example, this next video is actually a piece that I worked on with some students in the past, and it was weird, but they really enjoyed it. So in this case, they are hitting stools and getting a sound out of it. They're using a stool as an instrument. So by this definition, a stool could be a percussion instrument because they're striking it in some way and getting sound out of it. So wrapping up what we've learned today. So we finished up our 4 basic types of instruments. So we talked about woodwinds and percussion today. Make sure that you guys go to Schoology and complete the assignments for today. If you have any questions, you can email me and I'll help any way that I can. Have a good day.